Why mess with perfection? If a film is loved by fans, why tell them you can do it better? Well, money. That's usually a pretty good reason, but sometimes remakes turn out really well. In the world of horror, remakes are kind of infamous. There are a lot of bad remakes out there, and I think the fastest way to get a horror fan to roll their eyes and already become disappointed with a movie before it's even out is to say that you're remaking yet another beloved film. But I think there are a lot of great horror remakes out there. And so, out of my never-ending love for horror, I've put together the 13 greatest horror remakes in film history. The best of the best in horror franchises that are not only worthy of the series, but sometimes top the original. Some horror remakes bring a really fresh approach to an old idea. Some make right what went wrong in the first place. And every so often, you get a horror remake that actually tops the original and becomes beloved by fans everywhere. Now, can you guess what's at the top of this list? Yeah, probably. But this, I thought, would just be a fun way to go through some of my favorite horror remakes, have a good time with it, and bring you along for the ride. And of course, this is a subjective list based on my own opinions. Those opinions just so happen to line up with objective reality, so this list is factually correct. And now, on to horror's greatest remakes. At 13, Slumber Party Massacre from 2021, written by Suzanne Kelly and directed by Danishka Esterhazy. A remake of the 1982 original of the same name, this remake, originally released on the Sci-Fi Channel but way better than that immediately makes you think, takes the same concept of a group of girls attacked by a driller killer during their sleepover and adds layers of vengeance, self-empowerment, and believing in your own girl power a little too much for comedic effect. Come for the drill, stay for the great characters. The Slumber Party franchise is famous for being written and directed by only women, but these are directors and writers that were actually trying to make an honest-to-goodness, great, straightforward slasher movie, but naturally just brought in their own point of view and own ideas, which I think set these sorts of movies apart. The original Slumber Party Massacre is just fantastic in my opinion, one of the best slasher movies ever made, whereas 2 and 3 are interesting if pretty flawed. But I really enjoyed this remake, which sort of takes the original concept and makes it almost a legacy sequel while still doing its own thing and having a lot of fun with it. This is a much more comedic approach, much more self-aware, but it is still trying to deliver just a straightforward slasher throughout the entire runtime while having a lot of fun. What I really like about the Slumber Party remake is that it assumes that you are familiar with the original, so it takes a lot of those concepts and just twists them a little bit, makes them go in a slightly different direction, does a few different things with its characters, and by doing so, it's not subverting this idea, but instead is just kind of zigging where you think it's going to zag, and in doing so, catches you off guard frequently. I think that the third act of this movie is the weakest part of the film, which is a little bit of a bummer because I think it's really firing on all cylinders throughout its first 2 acts and is just a little bit of a come down, but I still really enjoy it. And even with that weakness, I think that this is a really fantastic legacy entry into the Slumber Party Massacre franchise. It's a great way to continue the legacy of the original because it knows why we loved that film in the first place. Oh, and it's got a banger soundtrack too. Anyway, 66 greatest slasher movies of all time, still coming soon. Is it better than the original? No, but I think the original and remake are going for 2 very different approaches. The original is very much a straightforward classic slasher that's given added depth because of its characters and themes, and is one of the all-time best, while the remake has a lot of metatextual ideas going on that make them very different experiences. What does it add? A lot more outright comedy for sure. Love guy number 1 and guy number 2. Plus, I like how many times the story twists on itself, making you never quite able to guess where it's going, especially if you're a fan of the original. At 12, Fright Night from 2011, written by Marty Noxon and directed by Craig Gillespie. Remaking the 1985 Vampire Meets Rear Window original, which was basically remade with its own sequel, and then this movie was kinda remade with its own sequel, but never mind that. What we've got is the story of Charlie Brewster, the late great Anton Yelchin gone far too young, and his vampire neighbor Jerry Dandridge, hot as shit Colin Farrell, and their game of cat and mouse, which gets its own twist by adding horror host Peter Vincent, who David Tennant basically plays as Chris Angel. As a modern set take, it's missing the 80s charm, but if you like the original Fright Night, you're gonna like this. I love the original Fright Night. To me, it's not just one of the best 80s vampire movies, which generally is a decade that has some of the best vampire movies overall, but is just a fantastic horror film, and every time I rewatch that original, I am surprised by just how good it is. The effects and the characters and the story pacing, it's wonderful. I mean, it is Vampire Rear Window, and you can't go that wrong if you're trying to do justice to the Hitchcock original. And here with this new Fright Night, I think that it still gets a little overshadowed by the original because it's not quite as good, but it's really fun. I like the characters. It's doing justice to the story again. It's moving it into the modern times and doing a little bit of interesting twists and turns with that. The dynamics between, Jerry and Charlie are just a little bit different, and it creates a different sort of tension between those two, as well as with Charlie's mom, and sort of this idea of threats next door, adding in this vampire layer. And I love all of the actors that were cast in the main roles here. What you've got is, you've got Yelchin and Farrell, and you've got Tennant. You've also got Imogen Poots as the love interest, and they're all great. We do have McLovin as our new take on Evil Ed, which is totally obvious when you're coming off the back of Superbad just a few years later. And today it just seems kind of like redundant almost, but he's fun in the role. And I think that everyone is having a good time with this, and I really do like the ways in which Tennant's character is slightly different, but the dynamic between Charlie and Peter is still there, and it's what makes this special. This idea of suddenly the monsters that you've seen in film are real and are, right here and are a threat, just kind of waiting for you and trying to do something about it is just going to be a really fun time. There is actually no different take on Fright Night because the original has its sequel, which is essentially a remake of the original, despite starring some of the same characters, but it's the exact same thing that happens. And then this movie got its own sequel straight to DVD, which is the same plot exactly again. There is one and only one type of Fright Night story, and you just have it 4 times. Is it better than the original? No, the original Fright Night is one of the best vampire movies, so I don't think any remake would top it. What does it add? Well, I would say it's largely the same as the original, if a little inferior, but it's still a good movie. David Tennant is awesome as always, but the entire cast is great here, and when you can recast beloved characters with great actors, you get success in a remake. At 11, The Invisible Man from 2020, written and directed by Leigh Whannell. The remake of the 1931 Universal classic monster movie, as well as the H.G. Wells novel that it was inspired by, The Invisible Man takes a bold swing of having the Invisible Man barely be in it. Instead, we're focused on Cecilia, who has fled an abusive relationship and now believes that she is stalked by her ex, who is using some sort of technology to spy on her, torment her, and tear her life apart. The film that results is a fantastic piece of paranoia that aligns the audience with the deeply troubled mind of the protagonist. So I think that this one specific take on the Invisible Man becomes a wonderful approach to what a monster in the modern day might be through use of a powerful metaphor. Universal has a very poor track record of remaking its own classic monsters, and that was the case before this movie with the horrible Dark Universe and The Mummy, and afterwards as well. I think it's really continued to struggle, but The Invisible Man by Whannell is the perfect way to go about it. It shows you just how to make a modern take on this type of monster, push it in a different way, make it effective, make it its own thing, not try to replace the legacy of the classic original, but just the thought of how can we move this into the modern age, make it scary, create some new themes and some modern fears layered on top of it, and roll with that is really great. Elizabeth Moss is doing this absolutely fearless, totally unglamorous performance as Cecilia, She is mentally and physically just breaking down throughout the entire film, and seeing that adds this level of stakes and emotional investment in the character as you're trying to figure out what's real and what's not. I do think the movie kind of shows its hand a little too early with some hints, because otherwise you could think it's all in her own head until the true reveal. But besides that, it's really, really awesome. The way that this film had a really small budget, but creates tension and paranoia with just lingering shots of empty rooms and empty halls, very slow movement back and forth, and tiny things changing, is a perfect way to make the most of your budget and use this character whose absence and stillness is often the scariest thing about it. The reveals and twists here are honestly consistently shocking, and the ending is this strange mix of darkness and triumph and this sort of emotional and moral grayness that I think adds a whole lot to the resolution. Is it better than the original? Well, I would say that it's a little bit better, but not by much, and the fact that both the classic Universal monster movie and the remake are doing two very different things means that it's all a matter of your own personal preference and what you think is more effective for you. What does it add? Like a lot of remakes that take a classic film that's deeply embedded in its period and moves it to the modern day, this One Invisible Man is adding both a modern sci-fi twist on the core concept and also more modern issues here, being focused on abusive relationships, paranoia, and being driven to the edge. At 10, Suspiria from 2018, written by David Kajganich and directed by Luca Guadagnino. If there's any movie that proves that a remake can be completely different from the original and still great, it's this one. While still telling the story of Susie Banion's arrival at a Berlin dance academy secretly run by witches like Dario Argento's 1977 film, Guadagnino's Suspiria is not a thrashing, slashing, hyper-colored piece of violence. Yes, it's got plenty of brutal moments of death, but it's much more about power struggles, grief, and discovering your true purpose. The plot and characters are much more impressive here, even if that's at the expense of the excitement, style, and thrills of the original. Before this was made, I don't think that anybody was expecting this type of film out of Guadagnino, and afterwards you've seen sort of the flexibility in the type of movies that he makes, so now it's not too surprising, but at the time, Luca Guadagnino making a Suspiria remake was totally insane and unexpected, but I like that this is a really fresh approach. You cannot enjoy the two Suspiria movies for the same reasons. They are just completely different in what they're trying to do, what they're saying, their filmmaking style, and their own approach to what they view as horror. And I get why some people that really like the original might hate this and vice versa, but I really do enjoy both. This is the Tilda Swinton show. She has multiple roles here, and Dakota Johnson is really good too as the central character, but Tilda is filling out so much of this story with her performances and ideas. This is showing you what a wonderful actress she is and everything that she can do and how Guadagnino uses her to the full range of her capabilities. And it's awesome. Having it set, in Berlin next to the Berlin Wall in the midst of the Cold War is using something that the original might have in the background, but doesn't take advantage of at all, just with its setting. And I think that is what Guadagnino is trying to approach with all of his characters, with this tension, with these sorts of power grabs and the back and forth between everyone within the academy, makes it very, very different. Plus, you do have these amazing dance sequences that do sometimes get interlaced with horror. There's one moment in particular with this, someone being just brutally, slowly crushed by a dance sequence is amazing. But besides that, it has its own take, and I really, really enjoy it for what that is. Is it better than the original? No, but the ways these movies are enjoyed are completely different. The original Suspiria is an all-time classic that blends the supernatural with slasher and post-giallo mystery. It's all vibes in the best way. What does it add? A completely different take. You've got the Academy, Helena Marcos, witches, and Mater Suspiriorum, yet instead of just being a physical threat, they're the focus of a story about grasping for power, reconciliation, and forgiveness. Plus, Thom Yorke's score and songs are the perfect mood setter here. At 9, Dawn of the Dead from 2004, written by James Gunn and directed by Zack Snyder. Remaking George Romero's mall-set zombie apocalypse from 1978 seems like a bad idea, But when Snyder's film came out, zombies were still pretty much passé. And really, this is one of the films that helped revive the genre because of its running undead, kinetic style, and edginess. Does it have the same effect of social satire? No, but it's one of the great head-empty, no-thoughts horror movies. The Dawn of the Dead remake is just a great experience on its own. When you compare it to the original, you can see its shortcomings and where it isn't reaching the same sort of social satire level as Romero's original, or its nuance with its characters, but I really enjoy this. It is a great time. You've got running zombies and tons of action and crazy effects, and it sort of crescendos into this insane climax that obviously they didn't have the budget for with the original. I don't think Romero was even thinking about doing, with all these trucks and hordes of zombies and explosions and tons of action. But that is a very modern take on zombies. On the zombie genre that has continued to evolve and been used for decades and been pushed into every single different way and also turned into video games. This is very much, a post-video game zombie movie where people go in expecting, tons of action, exploding heads, lots of people getting bitten and dying, and this is what Snyder and Gunn are delivering. And while I think that Snyder's style is very divisive in most every film that he makes, especially in the movies that came after this, I think that he pairs very well with, Gunn's early approach to screenwriting, which is this post-trauma sort of push all your buttons and kind of like be edgy for the sake of being edgy, and it works well for me. This is something that is just a great, fun time. It like I said, one of the great head-empty, no-thoughts takes on horror, but I love it for what it is. You want tons of zombies, you want tons of action, you want characters dying brutal deaths within this crazy apocalypse, you got it all here. Is it better than the original? No, but most zombie movies aren't going to beat the original Dawn of the Dead. Still, this is a lot of fun with the same concept. What does it add? Running zombies and heaps of ultra-violence. But also that opening scene, which is itself one of the best zombie scenes ever made. At 8, The Crazies from 2010, written by Scott Kozar and Ray Wright, and directed by Breck Eisner. Remaking the George Romero film from 1973, The Crazies sees a biological weapons spill in the small American town of Ogden Marsh, which drives the infected insane and ultra-violent. And with just a small group of uninfected trying to escape from the insane, and the deadly military quarantine trying to kill them off, this is a great premise that's given the scope, intensity, and violence that it needs to work really well. The second straight Romero remake on the list, I think that this is not only a little bit better than the Dawn of the Dead remake, but it is a much higher degree of improvement on the original. The original is just so limited by a very small budget, a very small scope, and Romero kind of not being able to do a whole lot with it, despite it being a great concept, that I think that The Crazies, the original, is just one of those ones that you can watch as a Romero completionist, but I don't think it's on the same level as his best movies. And here the Trixie infection is a little bit more like a classic zombie infection, but with them being, rage-filled, able to use different weapons. It's a little bit like 28 Days Later. It's a little bit like what you recently see in Resident Evil 9 because of that sort of strange level of mixing undead with their previous personality and pushing them over the edge. And I love Timothy Olyphant and Rhoda Mitchell here as our central husband and wife, some of the characters that float around them, and this becoming like their story of trying to first save the town and then save themselves. And it's this dark, unwinnable situation that the movie kind of emphasizes over and over again. It's not quite cynical, but it's just a little bit nihilistic. If you like Resident Evil or Justified, or like me, you like both, you're going to enjoy this movie. Is it better than the original? Yeah. I think that Romero's original Crazies is pretty weak. A good idea, but very hampered by a tiny budget and not doing nearly enough with an interesting premise. What does it add? Well, besides being, good, the remake's take on the Trixie infection is much more zombie-like, giving a more specific shape to this biological weapon that drives you insane. Combine that with a budget big enough for the story and Timothy Olyphant, and you get one of the best entries in the 2000s remake boom. At 7, Night of the Living Dead from 1990, written by George Romero and directed by Thom Savini. Born out of Romero and Company's desire to make up for the profits lost when the 1968 original was accidentally entered into the public domain, Savini's Night of the Living Dead is sort of a more obscure entry into the Dead canon because of its disappointing box office and inability to truly replace the original. Still, we've got a story that has the strength of the original, great performances by the GOAT Tony Todd as Ben, and Patricia Tallman as a new take on Barbara, and a really strong approach to horror, suspense, and class conflict. Okay, so this is the third straight Romero remake on the list, and Romero is just all over this list, and I think that speaks to the potency of his ideas, the long-lasting nature of his legacy, and how people have tried to improve on what he's made, and sometimes that working and sometimes not. There's plenty of bad Romero remakes out there too, or ripoffs. This one has such an interesting place in the Romero legacy because he did write it, he produced it, but he did not direct it. And because of that, you get a lot of the Romero style of its story and its characters. But then with Savini coming in as the director, his one time directing a feature film, and adding the effects, you get a different approach to what he's trying to do here. But at the same time, it's sort of lost in the shuffle of everyone still, loving the original Night of the Living Dead as this classic, as this foundation, and then jumping to Night of the Living Dead Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, then of course Land of the Dead and everything afterwards. And it's sort of just being this odd duck kind of caught in the middle, not getting a whole lot of love. But it has gotten a lot more reappraisal in the last few years because all of the gore that was cut out of this movie has been put back in with a recent unrated cut and have given people the chance to sort of reappraise it and re-experience it. I don't know what its lasting legacy will be after that, but I am glad it's gotten another shot because this is a great time. Tony Todd especially is awesome as Ben. This is the role that really helped break him out. And there's all these small little changes to character dynamics and sort of their relationships and choices that end up pushing the movie in a different direction toward its end. And I really enjoy that. Is it better than the original? No, but it's close. I think that the 1968 original is irreplaceable, even if it can be improved upon. But I think both of these takes belong in any horror fan's collection. What does it add? Besides some great Savini effects, which have been restored thanks to a recent uncut edition, new approaches to both Barbara and Ben push this story in a new direction and give it a really different viewpoint than the original. At 6, Nosferatu from 2024, written and directed by Robert Eggers. Nosferatu from 1922 is one of those foundational horror movies thanks to its legacy and stylistic impact on the story of both Dracula and the vampire myth as a whole. And no matter what you do, it will always stand as a bedrock of horror. Still, there's so many ways you can reinterpret it, and while I really like the Werner Herzog remake from 1979, I think that Robert Eggers' take, which was his longtime dream project, is amazing. The atmosphere, the performances, themes, characters, they're all so lushly brought to life. Is it doing anything all that different from the vampire movies you've seen before? No, but it's doing it at the highest level. I think the reception to this film is really interesting because there was a ton of hype around Nosferatu as it was about to come out, and then people saw it and thought like, oh, well, that's just another vampire story. That's like Dracula. I've seen it before. It's not that surprising. I thought it was going to be something completely original. But no, this is Nosferatu. It's very faithful in its, overall arc and story to the Murnau original and what that was trying to do. And I think that Eggers wasn't trying to make something completely brand new and fresh, but he was trying to make the film of his dreams and to take Nosferatu and do everything he could with it, bring it into modern filmmaking with a lot of reverence for the original, to try and lovingly recreate the time period that it's set in and make the most of it that he possibly could after several successes and getting enough of a budget for this. And I think he does an excellent job. It's an amazing film. It's really, really well done. I love everyone that's in this. Lily Rose Depp is amazing. You get Willem Dafoe being insane. It's really well made. It's well crafted. The craft is really amazing here. And this blend of the practical and the digital, I think Eggers does really, really well to create a very convincing time period. It's also also oppressively dark, but in a really hauntingly beautiful way. There have been a lot of different takes on Nosferatu over the years because of the legacy of the original and basically being a lost movie to some degree, almost lost, that everyone wants to kind of like restore it in their own vision and do something a little bit fresh with it. But this, I feel, is like the crowning achievement of these versions of Nosferatu. Is it better than the original? In this case, it may not be possible to truly compare two films made literally a century apart. Obviously, more people will have seen Egger's remake in the last few years, but you should definitely check out the silent film original if you enjoyed this. What does it add? A true rabid horniness. Suppression of sexuality and the society of 1800s Germany inform a lot of Egger's film, causing Count Orlok to use this pressure to quietly slip into the city and begin wreaking havoc. At 5, The Ring from 2002, written by Aaron Kruger and directed by Gore Verbinski. The movie that kickstarted the wave of J-horror remakes in the US is still the best one, and was its own phenomenon when it was released. And just like its Japanese original, this is the story of a mother and son who accidentally watch a cursed videotape and must find out how to stop the curse that will kill them in 7 days. The film that follows plays out like investigative journalism where the closer you get to the truth, the more reality is warped by the terrifying supernatural force at its center. This is one of those movies that scared me when I was young, even though I hadn't actually seen it. Just seeing little glimpses and clips or like the cover art at Blockbuster was enough to just freak me out a little bit. And so eventually when you watch it when you're a little bit older and can actually handle it, maybe no movie is ever going to fully live up to your imagination, but this is such an effective, scary, moody piece of horror, and it does live up to everything you imagine that it could be. And I think that's because Verbinski and company make this movie feel like a living nightmare. Obviously, you have the tape that is watched and all this, chaotic, scary imagery that comes to life, but then it feels like that seeps into the reality of the entire film. There's this greenish take on everything that I feel is very much of the time, but works really well because it's this huge mood setter. Naomi Watts is awesome as our lead, and I'm glad that this is a sort of style that isn't in every single movie because that would be exhausting, but here it just it works so well. I do really enjoy the original Ring, but there are all these sequels to both this movie and the original, and it is a huge mess. Just a huge mess. And even if you like this one and you like the original, maybe don't bother seeking out more. Is it better than the original? Yes. While I think the first Ring is great, there's something about Verbinski's style and the intensity of the horror here that works better for me, making the entire movie feel cursed instead of just the tape. What does it add? Besides transitioning the story to the United States and adapting its ideas for a different country, I think Verbinski really builds out a larger visual language for the world of The Ring that helped burn its images of the curse into the minds of audiences. At 4, Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978, written by W.D. Richter and directed by Philip Kaufman. A remake of the 1956 original and the novel it was based on, this second adaptation is taking the main idea of alien seed pods that duplicate and replace humans as exact doubles without any emotions. But just 20 years later, and the entire premise and execution takes on a very different meaning. Now, this paranoid conspiracy thriller becomes a lament for a dying counterculture and a degrading society that becomes a very nihilistic race against time to save the world, despite the film also wondering if there's any point. Obviously, this invasion is horror, but it's also sci-fi, but it's also really shot and written, and it feels like a political thriller. It feels like something like 3 Days of the Condor, where you are following a small group of people trying to uncover this vast conspiracy that's happening all around you. And it's also a personal drama. It's about a group of friends that have kind of grown apart, that are brought back together by this threat, and they've all changed in all these different ways. They're rediscovering each other and changes about each other and about themselves, sometimes in very literal sci-fi ways, and what that actually means to them as individuals and as friends in this group. And what I think is really effective about this version of Invasion is that it feels like you are thrown into the middle of this massive conspiracy, and that the entire world, or at least the city, it takes place in San Francisco, is changing all around them, but they don't realize it until they catch these glimpses. And that's what's really scary, is that they are small and ineffective in the midst of everything that's happening. And you sort of wonder, like, what can you do? What can you really change? Can you save everyone, or can you just save yourself, if even that's even possible? This is probably the quietest movie on this list. It is very small and intimate and quiet at times, very purposefully so, but I think that really adds to the tension, and I love that. Now, a lot of people talk about the shocking ending of this movie, which I'm not going to spoil. It was spoiled for me years before I watched this because it's so famous. And yeah, that's really effective, but again, without spoilers, what I think is the most effective moment near the end of this movie is this moment of loss between two of your characters, and what that means as they're pulled apart, and everything that happens in that moment to me is like personally so devastating, and it works really well. There are a lot of different takes on Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but I think this is the most effective one. And you know what? Screw it. Let's do a Body Snatchers retrospective. Is it better than the original? Yes, this is the definitive Body Snatchers movie, and this one still has the most effective execution of its central premise of societal assimilation and the desperate fight to remain an individual. What does it add? Really, it's a matter of the right writer, right director, and right cast at just the right time, using Cold War fears and growing social anxieties to push the Body Snatchers idea into a super effective metaphor for our fears. At 3, The Blob from 1988, written by Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont and directed by Chuck Russell. Remaking the 1958 film of the same name, The Blob follows the same story of an ever-growing, blob, that consumes any living thing in its way after landing in a tiny town. And as the squishy menace grows and eventually attracts the attention of the military unit tied to its origin, the only people who have a chance of stopping it are Good Girl Meg and Rebel Brian. And with some outstanding, disgusting effects and a conspiracy theory approach to a 50s Cold War origin, this Blob becomes one of my favorite horror movies ever. This movie is just so fantastically fun and crazy. It's constantly grossing you out. It's wowing you with the amount of different practical effects that were needed to make this Blob come to life. They use like every trick in the book. It's really wonderful. I did a video on this a few years ago if you want to check that out. And the fact is that it's just such a fun, great time that even though this movie can be super brutal and really does not pull its punches with its characters, which makes it really fun and twisty and unpredictable, is that you're having a great time throughout it. You're laughing and you're gasping and you're jumping. It is the best of what this type of creature feature sci-fi horror can be. It's not going for crazy, high-minded ideas. It has interesting conspiracy theory concepts at its center, which I think makes it much more cynical than the original, and I really love it for that. It shows the progression in American society from the 50s to the late 80s. But it's also just trying to have as great of a time as possible, make it fun, make you jump, and make you gasp. I love that mix of small town horror, small town characters, small town lives that collide with this potentially world-ending threat, and it all has to stop here or else everything is going to be destroyed. Oh, and I love that alien hard rock music over the end. Every horror movie should have some butt rock over the end credits. Is it better than the original? Oh boy, yeah. The original Blob is campy Cold War fun, but I think it has massive shortcomings in just about every area. Russell's film is one of my favorite 80s horror movies. What does it add? A whole lot of disturbing melting people and some biting cynical satire on the end of the Cold War. I think that Russell and Darabont make the Blob truly scary, and then use that to kick off a super fun and frightening film about government conspiracies and small-town heroes. At 2, The Fly from 1986, written by Charles Edward Pogue and David Cronenberg, and directed by David Cronenberg. This being up so high shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. Cronenberg's Fly isn't just regarded as one of the best remakes of all time, taking the 1958 original and pushing it in a very different direction, but one of the best horror movies ever made. And I think that's because its much more disturbing body horror take on a sci-fi concept burns itself into your brain, while its central relationship between Jeff Goldblum's Seth Brundle and Gina Davis's Veronica Quaife is genuinely believable, which then turns tragic. It's clear that this story of a scientist who accidentally merges with a fly while creating a matter transporter is a metaphor for slowly losing a loved one, whether that's due to disease, addiction, or anything else. And the slow, horrifying process is what creates that grief in audiences. This version of The Fly is small, it's sad, it's deeply personal, but it's really relatable despite its high concept because it's so intimately focused on this core relationship, about the ideas of loss, about losing the person that you love. First, losing them in a way that they change so much, in this case very literally, change so much as a person that despite loving them, they're not the person that you love and know anymore. And then losing them, as their body falls apart. Like I mentioned, this is a movie about losing a loved one, and you can put this metaphor onto anything that you wish. Often I think that your mind will be drawn to any sort of loss that you have experienced yourself, and that's what makes it really potent. It's a really small movie. It takes place mostly in one lab, and they use the whole budget, basically on the effects, which are incredible and so disgusting, so gross. This tops the Blob for grossness, maybe only topped in grossness by the next entry on this list, but it's just so effective. It is incredibly sad. It's weaponized sadness. Cronenberg has this huge history of body horror before this movie and somewhat after, but this is his masterpiece. Is it better than the original? Yes, the Vincent Price original is a lot of campy fun and has its own disturbing ideas, but it's nowhere near the same level of Cronenberg's story, characters, effects, and emotions. What does it add? Well, besides some incredible new disgusting takes on the transformation, a whole heaping amount of tragedy. The Fly's greatest weapon is its sadness, which laces the entire film. And at number 1, John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982, written by Bill Lancaster and directed by John Carpenter. Okay, yeah, so this is the least surprising entry ever, but what else could it be? Partially taking from the 1951 original The Thing from Another World, and also the 1938 novella Who Goes There, Carpenter's film is just as famous for being a box office bomb when released, as it is for being massively reappraised in the decades following. Today, it's regarded as one of the greatest horror movies of all time, and rightfully so. With fantastic characters, effects, direction, cinematography, score, and editing, The Thing is kind of a perfect movie, and truly stands as its own original vision, not just a remake. I love John Carpenter, I love Kurt Russell, I love The Thing. Now, I've talked about this movie many times before on my channel, so at the sake of sounding maybe a little bit repetitive, I just want to reiterate a bit about what makes The Thing so special, both as a remake and as its own story. As a remake, this is something that I think captured Carpenter's imagination and led him to sort of want to talk more about a beloved film that he once did, about a concept that he thought was really interesting. He often cites Howard Hawks as his major inspiration, so it's not a surprise that he already loved the original The Thing, which makes a cameo in the original Halloween. But this is really doing its own thing. This is a movie about assimilation, about disease, about paranoia, not trusting each other, whereas, the Hawks movie is very encapsulated, and we have this one creature that we're trying to stop because it's so deadly, but everyone that's human is obviously human. There is no worry about not trusting anyone else. But that is what really separates this movie. The effects are amazing. Love the score by Ennio Morricone, and I love all the performances as we get this dwindling group of people who are either kind of broken apart by their paranoia and fear or become stronger. And it shows you all these different reactions to this potential world-ending threat and what people are going to do and say. Are they going to try and save themselves, save each other, or just try and save the world? That's really what the decisions come down to in this movie. It's gross, it's scary, it's incredibly well crafted, and I do kind of understand why it was so poorly received at the time. Not only did this just come out a few months after E.T., which was a phenomenon and was all about this positive look at alien life and the possibility of connection and hope, but also there was a major backlash against horror by this point because of the slasher boom, because of moral outrage and satanic panic, and I sort of see why that happened at the time. I don't agree with it, but I get it in the context of society at the time. But This is so obviously one of the greatest horror movies ever made. Carpenter, with this movie, has this amazing, uncompromising approach to horror that pushes all of your buttons and pushes back against any sort of outrage and is just trying to make the most of this concept and go outlandish in its horror, in its scares, in its worries, and the gross out nature of the thing exploding out of people. And I can just watch this movie over and over and never get sick of it because I always find something new to appreciate about it. Is it better than the original? Yes, easily. I don't know if Carpenter would say so, as the original was produced and partially directed by his hero Howard Hawks, but where that film is an interesting idea and fun for its time, it has massive limitations. Carpenter's thing is everything great about horror. What does it add? Massive scale, incredible mind-boggling effects, a new approach to alien life and assimilation, and a fear of the unknown that is both without and within, which creates a sort of paranoia that isn't just a fear of the other, but of a fear of what you yourself could be. Oh, and Kurt Russell. If your new take on a movie adds Kurt Russell, it's an immediate improvement. And with that, we come to the end of our rundown of horror's greatest remakes. Of course, with having only 13 entries on this list, there are a few that I had to leave off for the sake of being only 13. Some of those include the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, the Friday the 13th remake, and the Hills Have Eyes remake. I didn't quite consider Evil Dead 2013 for this list. If I did, it would be pretty high, but I don't think that's actually a remake. It's sort of a reimagining, retake, doing its own thing, getting some new life in the franchise. So it's not quite a remake, but I do think it's awesome. But I think that even though there's a ton of bad horror remakes out there, no point in making a video on those, there's enough negativity on YouTube. The fact that there's enough bangers out there shows me that there often can be room for a new and fresh take that refines what we loved and what scared us the first time by bringing new life to a dead franchise. And if there's anything that horror likes to do, it's to show us that even what's dead may live again. Thanks for watching today's video, and this is another in my line of the 13 list for horror this year. It's been fun coming back to these sorts of lists, and it's fun to always do something a little bit more fresh and off the cuff. So I hope that you enjoyed this, as I know that horror remakes are an often hotly contested sort of topic. There are a ton of bad horror remakes, but what I found was really fun in making this list is that there was plenty of great ones. There's not as many great ones as there are bad ones, and I totally get why people often roll their eyes and are exasperated when yet another remake of a great horror film is coming out, but this shows me that there is always the chance for it to be great, and sometimes an improvement. And when they're truly awesome, they're some of the best horror movies ever made. I'd love to hear your thoughts on horror remakes in general, your own favorite horror remakes, and what movies you do actually want to see remade, because there's a lot of great potential for improvement. As always, a huge thank you to my members and patrons for their continued support, and if you'd like to be a member or patron, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video and monthly exclusive reviews. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and giving a horror remake a chance.